why are people leaving, and what specifically about Ohio is driving people away? So in this one, let's cover all those topics and exploration right
Girl, you wanna play with a big playboy like me? Oof. Girl, you wanna play with a big playboy like me? Oof. Girl, don't flex with the boy, your body is a matter. She wanna roll with the man them. When I drop, you know it's an anthem.
Jess called our team a few months ago just to make that move to Columbus for a job. And we helped her out, we got her a property, but one of the things that really shocked her was this idea of affordable living not really being that affordable. We talked about it beforehand, but Ohio ranks as the 13th highest state for property taxes. And that's not all. Our cost of living, especially with investors and with people actively buying up real estate, not just in Columbus, but also Cleveland and Cincinnati, it's driving up home prices. With projects that are actively being built like the Google project, like the Intel project, all it does is really drive up demand even more and more. And the final caveat is our electricity bill. Especially during the winter times, they tend to get up super duper high.
Tonight, it is always sticker shock when you open your electric bill after cranking up the heat. Even though it's in the high 70s tonight, we are not far from winter, and experts say your bills are expected to go up. They seem to go up a lot every year, don't they? Well, this is coming as millions of Americans are falling behind on the utility bill.
Make sure, especially when you are thinking about making that move, you have all of those numbers taken into account, because it's not just the house that you're buying, you're also going to be buying the electricity bill, the repair bills, and other things to go alongside with it as well. You know, thankfully, we're not like New Jersey when it comes to property taxes. I mean, they're the worst, but all these numbers have to be taken into account. Connect with a professional loan officer that knows what they're doing, that understands the local markets, and can absolutely make sure they can help you with the financial aspect of it all together. You see, every single county, every single area has a little bit difference in a property bill. Why? Because places like Dublin and Up Arlington have the best schools, so they're going to be up a little bit more in property taxes. You want to make sure that wherever you're going, you not only understand the mortgage aspect of it, but you understand the holistic picture from number one, the mortgage, number two, the electricity bill, number three, HVAC, number four, property taxes, and so many more. You know, just recently, one of my buddies got dumped, and you're probably like, where's Kagan going with this? Let me explain. Recently, he got dumped, and he's like, yo, dude, let's go out and party. Now, that's not kind of my vibe, but it's his vibe, and he knows who he is, so sorry about that. The thing with Ohio as a whole is our party scenes don't really exist that much. He was shocked when he was out of there by like 11 p.m. Now, obviously, there's some hidden spots and some places that you can go to go to some raves and things like that. Stick around to like 1, 2, 3 in the morning. But for the most part, our party scene is kind of dull and kind of lacking. Or if you go to college there, I'm sure there's a lot of parties there as well. But if that's something you're interested in, or that's kind of your vibe, then we don't really have that as much compared to places like Miami, or especially places like LA. You see, one of the negatives that our clients tell us about Columbus is the fact that there's really not much to do, especially in the evening. And a lot of the clients that we help are first-time home buyers that are moving here with kids or thinking about getting kids, and especially in tech. Now, a large portion of the clients that we help are, well, first-time home buyers looking to relocate for tech. And that means they've got kids, they're looking to obviously be a part of that tech environment, but also they're young enough to actually go out and enjoy those scenes. And it's kind of a shame when I gotta tell them that we don't have it as much. Now, granted, obviously it exists, but for the most part, if you are looking just for that party scene, that's it. You gotta go to LA or something. Now, granted, places like Lincoln Social Rooftop, they are open till around 11 p.m. over there on the 43215. You've also got Access Nightclub, which is open till around 2:30 in the morning over there on High Street. And if you're hungry after all that dancing, you just want a slice of pizza to go in that stomach, then you got Mikey's Late Night Slice, which is open till just around 3 a.m. And also, that's over there on the 43215 as well. So it's not like we don't have options, but let me just say, we don't have that many. You know, one of our favorite pastime activities used to be going to the mall with my dad. Now, especially now, during the Christmas season, that's all that we can really think about. But unfortunately, especially now, a lot of these malls that we know, well, they kind of cease to exist. You see malls like Northland and Westland once used to be super duper vibrant. Now they're kind of just like dead space. Now, granted, you still do have places like Easton Town Center and Polaris Fashion Place, but they're kind of the expectations and not the rule. You see, Columbus once hailed the name the city of the strip malls, and that was kind of our downfall as well. Let me explain. With so many strip malls as a whole, the issue that kind of happened was, well, we just had too many of them. And now when every single store kind of feels the exact same, people simply aren't happy. You see, the problem and what people were saying was this kind of just feels simply like I'm shopping at Target over and over and over again. And to add even more fuel to that fire, unfortunately, our downtown rejuvenization processes haven't gone the way that most people wanted. Now, granted, we are trying to grow downtown, especially with things like the merchant building and so many other projects, but unfortunately, the retail scenes have just gone vacant and astray. You see, especially with so many retail shops as a whole, a lot of people have too many options when it comes to specifically going here or going there, and Ohio as a whole just simply has too many of those outdoorsy malls when people, they kind of want to be inside, especially on days like today. Now, I think there was a solution, but we kind of missed it. Places like the Arena District and Bridge Park, although they're absolutely popping, they don't have that many malls. They're kind of filled with just bars and places for people to go out and eat and drink. Now, imagine if we had something that was young, creative, and hip in those locations. I think that would have turned the heat up a notch. But that's not to say that we don't have options. I think from like a marketing perspective, if we were to do things like bazaars or seasonal pop-ups, that will really reinvigorate the light, because those things are super duper limited. But what do you think? Do you think the retail scene here is good, or do you think it's gone downhill? Let me know. Now, I saw this post on Instagram that kind of made me laugh. They said, if you think Ohio traffic is bad, you've never been to LA. And I agree with that, but it's not like our traffic is still okay. You see, when we first made that journey here, we lived in a rural area, and the traffic was no problem whatsoever. But when we did make that journey and we made this place our home, we realized that it was pretty annoying. You see, I-70 and I-71 are by far the worst. You see, I-70 runs from Utah to Maryland, and I-71 runs from Kentucky to Cleveland. So those are pretty bad. But at the same time, in specific construction zones in Cleveland, in Cincinnati, and in Columbus, it gets pretty rowdy. Now, especially with all the construction that's happening and all the endless dead zones that exist, a lot of people get kind of backed up, and that just causes more and more problems. And one of the reasons for this is ODOT, or the Ohio Department of Transportation, oftentimes takes on these massive problems, which we absolutely have to get fixed. But what that does is generally kind of kill a lane. So instead of having 3, you have 2, and instead of having 2, you just have 1. Meaning for more and more people, it's just going to be a traffic nightmare. And what's even more prevalent is on days when Cincinnati is playing or Columbus has a OSU game, you can just expect to wait a super duper long time. Our fans are loyal, and we love that, but oftentimes what that means for traffic and congestion as a whole is it's just going to mean everything is boggled up. Combining with this, our pothole problems is, well, pretty bad. In 2022 alone, there were over 20,000 pothole repair requests. That's a lot. So when you think about all these things, obviously make sure that traffic as a whole is something that you can be okay with. Because if you work remote and you don't have to travel during those rush hours of 7 to 9, or usually from 3 to 7, you should be pretty good. Now, the other big issues that we're coming off with this is, number 1, the fact that we have limited public transportation, and number 2, because of the traffic congestion, more and more people are looking to move to the suburbs to make that their home. And obviously, when they're looking to move to suburbs, we have more development in the suburbs and not the city. And at the same time, what this means is longer commute times as a whole. So when you are thinking about making that move, take all these factors into consideration. Guys, when our clients are reaching out to us, one of the biggest things for them is education, right? A lot of their kids are going to school and they want to make sure they're getting the best education possible. So in terms of suburbs and where specifically you should live, we're always pointing them towards a few specific ones. Now, I'm not saying live here. I'm also not saying live there. But in places like Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, there's definitely going to be a few specific areas that we're going to see have more appreciation than other areas. Now, in Columbus, where we're from, one of the biggest things is we've got, well, Upper Arlington and Dublin, also New Albany having a lot, and I mean a lot, of people actively looking to make it their home. You see, it's not only these places, but one of the big things is other locations like Reynoldsburg and Pataskala, even Blacklake, they've got a ton of new developments that are always popping. Now, I know we talked about how there's more and more development happening closer to the suburban areas, meaning that you got to drive more, but people are okay with that. And especially as they start to drive and all these locations start getting more and more new developments, they're eventually going to have to start churning schools, meaning they're going to have to start making better schools as well. Some of these neighborhoods are absolutely popping already, and I'm excited to see the growth. But when you're thinking about making that move, make sure you have all those things taken into account, because the other caveat to this is also very, very simply this: better schools also means better taxes. Places like Shawnee Hill and Darville are absolutely seeing some of the biggest growths ever. You see Ohio as a state, although, well, not as fast growing as places maybe like Miami, even Seattle, we're still definitely appreciating in price point. One of the biggest things for us is we're actively looking at investment opportunities. So when you are thinking about making that move, obviously make sure to take all these factors into consideration. Combining with that, our seasonality is pretty rough. On the winter times, make sure that you have all-wheel drive. Make sure you know how to drive safely in the winter. Rear-wheel drives, I know it's hard to say, they tend to not perform the best, especially in these climates, and we have multiple different climates all throughout the year. And then the final thing about this is parking as a whole can kind of suck, especially in places like Soda or the Short North Art District. We're not that jam-packed, but at the same time, our parking is kind of terrible. So you want to make sure that all of these things are taken into account. You see, when Matt came here from Arkansas, one of the biggest things that he told us to say, I want to be in Dublin all the way. And we're like, I love it, let's go. So he was moving here for tech, and the one big thing that he realized, especially when him and his wife were looking to go out and just enjoy that Sunday afternoon, is there were no parking spots. And he texted us and he said, dude, where are the parking spots? Where do I park? I told him this beforehand, but it's kind of a realization that you just have to have when you do make that journey over to Columbus and to Ohio. You know, my buddy just graduated from OSU a few months back, and he said, Gagan, I'm actually heading out to Michigan. And I was like, what are you talking about right now? He goes, yeah, I got a tech job over there. Now, granted, I was super happy for him, but I was also super upset that he was going to our rival, you know what I mean? But when I started thinking and started doing some more numbers and started looking at everything, what we realized is although Columbus is the Silicon Valley of the Midwest, Ohio as a state is very much so lacking in technological growth. You see, places like OSU and Case Western Reserve, they have a lot of really cool tech programs. The University of Cincinnati, amazing school. But although people are graduating from these locations, Ohio as a state is struggling to retain them. You see, in 2022, Ohio ranked 35th in retaining STEM graduates. And that tells me a lot. It tells me that we are struggling to obviously keep people around because we don't have those jobs that they're specifically looking for. Now, albeit we do have AWS or Amazon Web Service, we've also got Google and a lot of really cool data centers. That's kind of the extent of the technological services, meaning that places like Silicon Valley, they specialize in software, AI, and biotech. Here in Ohio, we specialize in logistics, manufacturing, and health tech. And it's not like there's no venture capitalist opportunities that exist. Techstar and Rev1, they were trying to grow, but compared to places like Silicon Valley that had $100 billion in venture capitalist money, Ohio only had 1.2. Now, obviously $1.2 billion is, well, pretty awesome, but not in comparison to the other projects that exist. And the second thing that we gotta understand, Ohio's GDP from 2010 to 2020 grew by 17.2%, but compared to the national average, grew by 23%. So obviously we're growing, just not at the pace that we want to. And what's kind of ironic about this is most of the people that do connect with us, especially to buy a house, well, they're in tech. And if you're thinking about making that move, you're thinking about making that journey, our QR code is right here. Let's connect and just see if Ohio would even be a good fit for you. Now, when these opportunities do come, the other shoe has to drop. For the exact same position in San Fran, you're making $150,000. Here in Columbus, you're only making around $87,000. Now, I say that relatively because our cost of living is lower than San Francisco's, obviously, but at the same time, there's always going to be that factor of how much am I making in comparison to what specifically am I doing. The other issue that we're going to face is we rely simply too much on infrastructure and manufacturing as a whole. I'm glad that we've started to diversify our portfolio, especially in GDP and the economics, but for the long term, we've just focused way too heavily on two specific industries. Now, my family's never really been the biggest football fan, right? We've always enjoyed soccer a little bit more, but in Columbus, it's just that's kind of a cardinal rule. You can't break that.
And let me tell you, the Buckeye games that we did go to, they were live and they were fun to actually watch. So we slowly started turning ourselves into that Buckeyes family fan. But at the same time, when we want to go watch professional games, we've also got the Cavaliers in, well, Cleveland. Now, they're doing better now, but it's just never felt the same since LeBron left. Now, when we do want to watch soccer, we've got FC Cincinnati and the Columbus Crew, but at the same time, it's not too many options that exist. We don't mind it because we do get to watch some Messi play sometimes in Cincinnati, which was always super duper fun, especially over there in FC Miami. But when you're thinking about making that move to Ohio and you're considering obviously that jump, one of the biggest factors that you have to take into consideration is what exists in terms of entertainment and what exists in terms of sports, right? For us, we're a massive, massive football fan. And especially those heavy hitter games like against Michigan, I mean, you're going to expect at least like 75 to 100,000 people at those games. Those games get rowdy and absolutely crowded. Now, obviously cities like Boston, New York, and even California, they've got teams all around for every single sport. But here in Ohio, that doesn't really exist as much. And for a lot of people, especially if you're not a football fan, you might feel a little bit isolated. Now, especially for us, we've definitely transitioned ourselves into a Buckeyes family, and we enjoy watching those games now. And if you enjoy watching those now at all and you love Ohio State, I mean, this is going to be the perfect place for you. If you're a Bengals fan or you want to watch FC Cincinnati, I mean, that exists over there as well. You've got the Cavaliers over in Cleveland, and all of these locations are only about a 2-hour drive from each other, so it's nothing crazy as well. Now, this is going to be the most comprehensive reasons why you should not move to Ohio. And look, I've seen a lot of videos talk about the very, very basic topics, like the pros and the cons, the cost of living. But in this one, I want to dive into things that you really haven't heard. And my goal is very simply this. I want to make sure that you have all of the facts before you make that decision to make sure that you are making the right decision. Now, although we are considered a Midwestern state, our weather does tend to get absolutely sporadic. Now, especially on days like today, our snow can get bad. This year in particular, we haven't had crazy amounts of snow, but our weather does tend to go from up to down pretty quickly. But there are going to be days where the snow is just absolutely crazy. Now, from November to March is generally when you can expect the weather to get kind of crazy. You see folks in Ohio spend up to $1,200 on their heating bill per year. Now, that tends to add up. And on top of that, I mean, especially with not only the clothes that you got to buy because of the weather, the gloomy days, the fact that sunshine doesn't really exist, especially when it's snowing, a lot of that is also going to affect your mental health as well. SAD, or seasonal affective disorder, is a real thing, and something that we know a lot of people are affected by in all across the country. And the summers can get up to 90 degrees. Now, obviously, it's a little ironic due to the weather that's outside, but take all these factors into consideration because it's not just the springtime and the summertime that it's hot, it's the wintertime that gets super duper cold. Personally, I'm a fan of all 4 seasons. It's just the way that I like to operate and the way that I go. But if you don't enjoy it, then it might just simply not be for you. You know, since 1896, Ohio has been that state that was ultimately the decider for every kind of political election. And today was no different, especially in 2024, with every single thing that's happened in the political campaign. It's only fair to say that Ohio had a pretty large part to play. Especially with J.D. Vance being, well, the vice president of the country, there's a lot of political turmoil that happens. And that's a big caveat to actually moving to Columbus and really moving to Ohio as a whole. You see places like Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, the metropolitans, they do tend to lean pretty left. And more of the rural, suburban areas, they tend to lean, well, a little bit more right. These places and these conversations, they can have their own effect on everyone. And more than anything, they kind of tend to create a political divide amongst the people that live here. Now, personally, I believe in the terminology we the people, meaning that we the people should be sticking together, banding together, and ultimately deciding what's perfect for each other. I believe that the lack of bipartisanship is what destroys communities and people's relationships as a whole. Especially with technology, I personally think that we've gotten so distant and far away from people, we don't really understand or have that human connectivity that our ancestors and our grandparents did. But with that being said, especially during times of political campaigns, Ohio tends to get a lot, and I mean a lot, of advertisement. Now, when John moved here, all he said was, dude, I just went off of Facebook for a month. And I love that idea, but for a lot of us, Facebook is kind of that addicting tool. So if you are thinking about making that move to Ohio, understand this one very, very simple idea. We are a battleground state. And for better or for worse, we have a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. And I believe ideas is what catapults and creates relationships, but can also become the deterrent that, well, destroys relationships. And combining with this, our relaxed gun laws, I know that's going to get a lot of conversations in the comments, but our relaxed gun laws create a lot of, well, conversations to be had. Now, personally, I am an immigrant, right? I came into this country in 2008 with nothing but the clothes on my back and my parents and my sister. I believe in the right to bear arms. I believe in the ability for people to protect themselves. But I also believe that we need to make sure that we're having the best background checks. I also believe that having absolutely destructive weapons is not the best option for everyone. And that's my personal opinion. You can disagree with it or agree with it, but we just know, especially from a political landscape perspective, this is creating so many conversations and really so much arbitration all around that, well, it's just not the best approach. You know where Ohio kind of reminds me of? Italy. Let me explain. I think our pace of life is a lot more slower than most major cities, especially coming from New York, where the pace of life is go, go, go in a city that never sleeps. It was kind of a change in scenery and kind of a culture shock when everything was just so much more slower. And that's kind of how Ohio is as a whole. You see, I had a buddy of mine that came here from Jersey, and he said, well, people get done in Jersey in a day. It takes Ohio 4 days. And I couldn't help but laugh because I couldn't completely disagree. I think the fact that we move at a much slower pace also shows how much more we appreciate life, but at the same time, we do tend to move at a slower pace. And for someone like me, who is definitely a high D personality that just wants to go, 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 that can definitely take some time and getting used to. And you know, outside of places like Hawkins Hill or Lake Erie, our scenery, especially when it comes to enjoying nature, is kind of, well, sedentary as well. It's kind of ironic how we have a slower pace of life, but the things that we get to just enjoy that slow pace of life with don't really necessarily exist. Now, the East Coast as a whole is, well, it's not as very beautifulistic or beautified as the West Coast, right? You've got Colorado with its mountains, you've got Portland with its mountains, you've got California with its beaches. Ohio and really just the Northeast, we don't really have that as much. Now, obviously, I know we consider ourselves a Midwestern state, especially in the Midwest, that doesn't exist as much either. So when you are thinking about making that move, obviously take all these factors into consideration because, well, again, we talked about this before, the nightlife doesn't exist as much. And at the same time, our ability to go outside and find more and more picturesque locations isn't quite there in comparison to most major cities. One of my favorite phrases is don't take my kindness for weakness. And I think that's applicable here in Ohio. You see, we've got our Midwestern charm and we've got our kindness that's applicable, but don't push people's buttons. Because that kindness is definitely not weakness. And that's what we noticed at that coffee shop over there last week. Guy was saying, this isn't what I ordered. She said, yes, it is. Here's proof of it. He was being annoying and saying he'll call the manager. And she said she was the manager. And she was just getting absolutely fed up. And we're team barista. Let's be completely honest here, because that guy was kind of a prick. But for the most part, don't push the charm too much. Because although we do have that ability to be kind, at the same time, people that live here, they're definitely not going to keep going on with the bullshit. Especially for people that are coming here from California or even places like Mississippi or Missouri or anywhere down south, this can kind of come as a cultural shock. You see, Ohio is progressively, well, becoming more of a progressive area. And with that being said, we're definitely not going to be willing to take any kind of shit from anyone. So especially when these things are absolutely happening, you got to make sure that you understand what specifically is going on. Because the last thing that you want is to have that cultural shock where you're just absolutely bonkered by what and how people actually treat you here. You know, when I was going Christmas shopping over there on Easton Town Mall, one of the craziest surprises that hit me was it was so freaking packed. And that's kind of the thing that we're realizing with places like Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. Is these locations are definitely getting a lot more jam-packed. You see, more and more people are actively making that migration and calling these places home, meaning that we're gonna have less places to park our cars and more people to actually compete with in terms of the housing market. Now, we've seen the housing prices absolutely gone up tremendously in the last few years, but we're also noticing is more and more people are actively coming here left and right. And for me, as someone that's operating in the real estate world, that makes me super duper happy. But for more and more people that are looking to make that move as well, all that means for them is competition. From people that are looking for their first time careers to retiring as a whole, we're seeing every single kind of person actively looking to make Ohio home. And that tends to be a good thing, but at the same time, because of overpopulation, overcrowdedness, and really just a lack of homes, it gets super duper competitive. So take all those factors into account. The same reasons why you think you should move to Ohio, most people are also thinking that as well. And the ultimate question is, who specifically is going to make that decision first? Now, with that being said, take all these things into consideration when you're thinking about making that move to Ohio. And if you're curious about what all the new things that are being built and actively happening in Columbus are, I actually did an entire video on that right here. Watch it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.